Thanks, Rope, and good morning, everyone, here at Hanaholmen and also online. I don't know how many people we have online at the moment, but good morning to online audience as well. I'm going to talk about an experiment that we did with the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment, and I and myself and Annika did the science part of the experiment. Annika Nivala is not here today. She's visiting Berkeley this year and going to NTA conference today to Boston. So our article is about the first employee subsidy for non-employer firms, or based on the experiment. But in the article, we take also a bit broader view on large-scale randomized experiments with population data, with the kind of idea that it might be useful to think about a bit more broadly and more generally this type of experiments for people who might be thinking about these kind of things for future experiments. So randomized experiments are a common tool for estimating causal impacts of policies, but they come in very different forms. And one kind of quite common limiting feature is the availability of data, and this limits typically the design of experiments. So experiments are very common in developing countries, and especially there, this type of kind of register data sets are not available. So kind of this is what we focus on. So we focus on a class of experiments where data are available in population registers, and kind of one important feature is that the take-up is not complete. And this is very typical in many public support policies. For instance, people are not forced to take a subsidy or transfer or an allowance. These type of policies typically just incentivize people to make some actions that they are kind of intended to do. And the third kind of specific feature of this type of experiments is that treatments are costly. They are not free. So for instance, as opposed to information treatments, where kind of scaling up the experiments doesn't cost much, because scaling up information is not or sharing information to one additional person does not cost much. So these three features are kind of quite typical for many public policies. If you think about public policies that cost a lot for societies, such as many subsidies, many allowances, many transfers, you could think about free vaccination and so forth. So take-up is incomplete and treatments can be very costly. So the kind of the general structure of our article is first we kind of discuss this type of experiments with a bit more broader perspective, not focusing on just one experiment. So we discuss some econometric topics that are relevant for this kind of experiments, with the kind of idea that this might be useful for people in the future who do this kind of experiments. And then we discuss lessons from the Finnish recruitment subsidy experiment, and kind of also addressing the assignment from the editors of also discussing the administrative side of this type of experiments, and kind of the cooperation between researchers and the other parties that are needed in this kind of large-scale national experiments. So in Nordic countries we have widely available population data, and this gives us huge advantages when we think about running large-scale experiments. These registers eliminate data costs, given that, or data collection cost, given that we tend to think that these data sets are collected anyway. They enable scaling up these experiments, without limitations, or the limitation being the size of the population. They facilitate planning and implementation, having data beforehand in registers for seeing what the target populations have been doing, what are their outcomes their outcomes in the past is extremely useful. And one important feature that large-scale register datasets allow is that they allow estimating the impacts of offering the treatment to a wide population. Not just those who sign up for the treatment, but for everyone. And this is important for estimating the impacts of what would happen if we kind of implemented the policy in the whole population, not just in a selected part of it. And this effect of offering the treatment, it's referred to as the intention to treat effect, and it's a key parameter of interest in many public policy contexts. And this is because the impacts of policy is not only determined by how much a treatment affects those who take it up, but also on how large fraction of the population that is the target of the policy will take it up. So if the fraction of takers is very low, then obviously the impact of the policy at the aggregate will be only small. And this is critical when compliance is imperfect, and the importance of understanding the effects of offering the treatment increases with the share of units that do not take it. So with the incompleteness of compliance. So that's kind of the introductory part of the article, and then we go to kind of the discussion of this type of experiments with a bit broader perspective, but quite untechnical still. And we talk about experiments with imperfect take-up and population data. Today I'm going to kind of the weight will be not in this part, but rather on the recruitment subsidy experiment instead. But I will say I have a couple of slides on this part as well. But I will not go to a bit more technical parts. So the setting that we can think about more generally is the one where treatment group is offered a treatment, and the treatment is conditional on taking an action. And treatment affects the agent's incentives to choose the action, but the agent is not forced to take the treatment or take the action. So it's only the incentives that shift with the policy. So the typical treatment setting in the kind of public policy context would be, for instance, investment subsidies to firms, student allowances for students, free vaccines, bonus pension from additional years of work, and so forth. So this is kind of very typical setting for kind of many important policies that we have in place in the Nordic countries. So in this type of, when you start to think about how to evaluate the impacts of this type of policies, one issue that arises is that comes with the fixed budget. So when this kind of experiment is planned and it usually involves policy making, and it involves setting a budget for it, and the policymakers may want the budget to be used completely. And also the researchers typically want to use the budget completely in order to get as precise estimates as possible. But this comes with the problem of how to hit the budget correctly. There is a risk of undersubscription if you offer for too few individuals the treatment. Then in the end there might be too few, or you will not use the whole budget, and then there could be oversubscription if you offer it to too many units. So this is kind of quite trivial, right? But then when you have a multi-million experiment and you really need to hit a given large budget, it's really kind of it's not that easy. So the problem with under and over subscription is that under subscription means that we have too little, we lose precision in the experiment. With over subscription, there could be actually even worse problems. We can get bias in the estimates if those who are left out because the budget runs out are certain types of individuals or firms. So in the article we discuss how to manage these risks, the risks of over and under subscription. And kind of our solution is a multi-stage experiment where in the first stage we run a smaller experiment in order to estimate the take-up, and in the second stage, based on the estimate of the take-up from the first stage, we scale up the second stage to try to get an informed kind of decision on how to best hit the budget correctly. Of course, if you have more stages, if you have the ability to do, say, 3 or 4 stages, you can get more. You can reduce the kind of risk or you can more precisely hit the budget. But in our case, it turned out to be a pretty good number. We discuss how to set the number of offers in a multi-stage experiment, and we discuss how to do power calculations in such an experiment. But I'm not going to those issues in more detail today. But those will be, for those who are interested, will be in the article once it comes out. And then the third section of the article will be more kind of practical, and it will describe the Finnish recruitment subsidy experiment and discuss kind of the implementation in a perhaps more detailed manner than you would do in a typical scientific article, with the view that it would be useful for those who think about running this kind of experiments in the future. It would be useful for also the administrative side to understand what's involved with this kind of experiments and so forth. So the experiment was administered by the Finnish Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment. It was run in 22 to 23. Basically in 22, the subsidies were allocated, and then by the end of 23, the last firms, kind of their use of the subsidy ended. And the goal was to evaluate whether a monetary subsidy induces non-employer entrepreneurs to hire their first employees. So whether we can make employers with this kind of subsidy. And the kind of secondary question was whether this spurs firm growth, whether these firms really then after hiring these new employees, whether they grow more than they would in the absence of the subsidy. So the article discusses the planning, timeline, implementation, and evaluation of the experiment, and we also discuss briefly data management issues and some other issues that are kind of more in the kind of administrative side of the experiment. So about the planning process and timeline, the experiment was in the government program. So the new government started in 2019, and kind of this is kind of important thing because without political will, there is unlikely large-scale experiments happening because these typically require legislative efforts and they require legislation to be made. So government has to, in the end, decide on them. But this government wanted to kind of provide evidence-based, do evidence-based policy for this specific instrument. We can only speculate why. Maybe they wanted to promote evidence-based policy making, which I believe is probably true. Maybe this was the type of subsidy that they really wanted to work. If it doesn't work, they don't want to have it in place. But we can only speculate on that. So the planning of the experiment started early 2020. So that was kind of at the ministry, and we were contracted to do a plan of the experiment later in the year, and it was published in January 2021. So there was already 1 year gone after the kind of initiation of the experiment. I think that could have been faster as well, if needed. And then based on the plan, the government made a decision and law preparation started. So we made a pre-analysis plan that then the government used to kind of as a background information, among other things, to decide whether they want to do this or not. So this is kind of, I guess, a typical kind of a process in this kind of large-scale experiment, that there has to be a plan first, and only after that the government can decide on that. So there is also uncertainty for the researcher side on whether this is going to happen or not, in comparison to, for instance, smaller experiments where you get research funding to run a whole experiment. We were quite happy with the final design, and we were able to affect it quite a lot, but it was still a compromise between the kind of ideal experiment that we had in mind and the administrative and political feasibility. So after the plan and when the government was deciding about the experiment, there was we had to find some kind of, or iterate towards a feasible but yet useful experiment. So the useful was kind of in terms of getting reliable results that would be useful for policy making, and the feasibility was then the kind of political and administrative. But my view is that there were no kind of too strict restrictions for kind of doing a useful experiment from the researcher side. Then in 2021, so in January, the plan was published and available, and then it took the whole year to or the government decided in the spring, and it took quite a lot of time to pass the law. So the legal kind of legislative process is typically takes a lot of time. It doesn't need to, but typically it takes on average quite a lot of time. The law was passed a year after the plan was published in January 22. And then after that, it was quite a fast kind of development. But I will come that to later. But in 3 months, we were already allocating the subsidies. So a few more words about the kind of planning process. We argued for randomization at the level of the whole target population, not just among those who are willing to take the subsidy, in order to get the intention to treat effect estimates. And this is because we knew that or expected that the take-up is going to be low. So it's going to be important to get the ITT estimates. And kind of we were kind of in a good position when we were planning this, because we had the registered data sets where we saw what the target population was, their kind of distribution of their outcomes, and how typically they become employers and so forth. But there was also a prior study by Annika where she looked at a regional kind of experiment. It was not a randomized experiment, but was a similar type of policy that was in place in certain regions. So that allowed a regional difference in difference design. And in that study, Annika found out that there was extremely low take-up. So it was only the take-up of the regional recruitment subsidy or recruitment support was only 2% among new employers. So those who become employers of the eligible firms. So it seemed like a lot of companies left money on the table. So this was not a popular instrument at all. So this kind of very low take-up can arise from complexity of the scheme, poor salience, application costs, and also there could be features in the policy itself that limits eligibility. So for instance, in the regional policy, the kind of, in order to be eligible, the job contract had to be at least 25 hours per week. So it was kind of a quite permanent type of arrangement. So that might be one reason why it was not so popular. If typically a non-employer entrepreneur who hires the first employee needs only less than 25 hours of labor, typically so. But this observation was very important because it let us think particularly carefully, design features that would increase take-up, especially among those who become employers anyway. So we would like to have those entrepreneurs to use the subsidy. So, and I will talk about those features in a few slides. But this prior research also helped us to convince the administration that it's really important to think about these things, so that the policy itself is something that a firm that is considering to employ a new employee, but is kind of at the margin, that this kind of company should then take up the subsidy. It should be eligible to use it. Okay, so kind of these considerations are pre-analysis of the register data and also kind of the lessons from this prior work led us to design the subsidy. And in the end, the recruitment subsidy covered 50% of wage costs up to 10,000 euros of the first employees of a non-employer entrepreneur. And the entrepreneurs who used the subsidy could use it over 12 months. So the target group that was kind of the non-employer firms, more specifically, they had no employees in the previous 12 months. So for the past year, they had revenue between 15,000 and 1 million euros in the previous year. So we cut out the smallest and the very large firms, and that in our pre-analysis, this is actually not restricting the target population too much, but it improves precision. And then there are some kind of technical requirements of having no tax debt and so forth. And this target group was identified from tax registers. So one kind of important thing that we allowed was that this need not be one employee. It can be first employees, not just one. So the firm was able to use the 10,000 euros for more than one person. So then what we did with the randomization was we stratified by revenue quartiles within 2-digit industries. So this we kind of looked alternative ways to do it and simulated what will be the precision, and ended up with this quite simple stratification. And then on the last line, the PEO, which is the Public Employment Office, or the TE-keskus, they ran the randomization code that we wrote. And the randomization code was published before running the randomization, so it was kind of a transparent way of doing it. Then the experiment was conducted in 2 waves. So this was to manage the number of offers that we made. We had the budget was 9 million, which allowed 900 kind of full subsidies of 10,000 euros. So in the first wave, which the aim was to estimate take-up rate, and there we in the pre-analysis plan we ended up to a smaller, quite small first wave, because the precision will be enough to get quite precise estimate of the take-up rate with 3,500 treatment takers. And on the other hand, we don't want the too large first wave, because that will risk having a oversubscription in the first wave, and that's something we really don't want to happen. And we had 20,000 firms in the control group. So the randomization was in March, and so this was 3 months after the law passed or they took effect. And these firms had until the end of July to hire and apply for the subsidy. And here the take-up rate that we estimated was 1.1%. So this kind of was what we expected. This was larger than in the regional experiment, but this kind of also showed that it's very important to understand how many firms take up this subsidy when for instance, when the Ministry of Finance wants to calculate what's the aggregate employment, or have some kind of idea what's the aggregate employment effect in the target population from this kind of subsidy, then we really need to know that the take-up rate is quite low. This low take-up rate also meant that actually what's limiting the size of the second stage is the size of the non-employer firm population. So actually we could have offered, or the budget would have allowed more than half of the whole target population to be offered the subsidy. So in the end, what we did was we determined the size of the second stage based on the optimal treatment to control group split. And this, with some rounding, this is ended up to 31,000 treated and 34,500 control firms in the second stage. And the first and second stage together, so the first stage is also used when we estimate the treatment effects. The first stage is also used. So we combine the second and first stage in order not to lose any precision. So the first stage is not only to get the take-up rate, but it can be used to test the primary and other hypotheses. Okay, so then we have some subsections on allocation of subsidies and data management, which we think might be useful for people who think about this in the future. I'm not going to details of this too specifically, but the Public Employment Office allocated the subsidies, so it was not us. It was kind of as if it were a full-scale public policy, so it was implemented like that. And then kind of one important part is to plan in advance and kind of in a controlled manner do the communications, because then the Public Employment Offices, they typically communicate to their customers, so firms, and they have their own ways, and they might have their own kind of incentives. But when you're running an experiment, and for instance, when we had to inform the treatment group that they're eligible, there we wanted to have the messages so that they will not kind of risk the experiment in a sense that they would be kind of a neutral letters. So these communications were planned with the PEO and us. So there needs to be also good cooperation between the administration and researchers. And then we have the section on data management, which might seem a bit kind of not so exciting unless you really have to think about how to manage the data in this kind of big experiment. So kind of the pre-planning was made by us with the data licenses that we have, kind of the data that we already were using. And then for the planning stage, we got data from the tax authority. That was kind of a restricted set of variables that we got needed for planning the randomization code and testing it. And then the PEO got a wider data set which had more information which they needed in order to kind of fulfill their legal requirements and check whether everything is as the law intends. And then kind of one important part of this kind of experiments is to put up an experimental register. So this was then administered by the KEHA Center, which provides IT services to PEO. And with this experiment, an important feature of the legislation was that the law gave the evaluator, whoever it would be, the right to use basically any administrative data set needed for the evaluation. So this was quite important, and I think it would be useful to have for any experiment in the future. Okay, so in the last part of kind of this section, we talk about the evaluation that we did. So that's the kind of scientific analysis of the results of the experiment, and compare it to the prior work by Annika on the regional subsidy. So in the RCT, the kind of the primary hypothesis was whether this subsidy increases the fraction of employer firms in the target population. And we find that the fraction of firms that hires workers increased by 20% in the hiring window. So that's kind of in the first months of the experiment, and 11% during the whole subsidy period. And these percents are from the baseline fraction of baseline share of firms that hire workers during this period. So the baseline is quite low. For the 20% it's around 3%, and for the 11% it's around 6%. So that's kind of good to keep in mind. We have the scientific evaluation. We have a working paper on that, the English version. We have that on our websites. So anyone who is interested in that is advised to look up from there. And we find similar effects of similar magnitude on wage costs and employment in these companies. So that's kind of aligns with what we find for the fraction of employer firms. And the kind of one important finding is that the fraction of firms that employ workers is also kind of the positive effect persists after the subsidy period ends. So after the subsidy payment end. So that kind of suggests that there was a permanent effect of this temporary subsidy. It's important because, of course, if we give firms money to hire workers, they likely do that. Something goes wrong if they don't. But then, in order for this kind of policy to have any kind of, in order to have any economic rationale, it should have persistent effects. And the idea is that these companies go over some kind of threshold for becoming an employer, pay a one-time fixed cost of becoming an employer, or get the information required with the help of this subsidy. So this is quite a small table, but it kind of summarizes the comparison between the RCT and the regional first employee subsidy. So the kind of first half of the table compares the kind of features of the policy, and then at the end there are some. Last half has some statistics. So the key differences are highlighted with red text. So of course the one we did was RCT, and Annika's paper does a regional diff and diff. One important kind of difference in the regional instrument was that it required the kind of contracts to be at least 25 hours per week. So if these entrepreneurs couldn't hire for this many hours, then this might be one restricting feature. In the RCT, one feature that we wanted to implement was that it's as easy as possible. So we proposed that it's automatically paid monthly based on the income tax register, where these firms need to report their the wages that they pay monthly. And this was, in the end, this was what we did and what the administration was willing to do, and that was great because it simplified the process for the entrepreneurs and the application costs for the entrepreneurs a lot. So they only had to apply once, kind of to become eligible for the subsidy and kind of so they applied once from the PEO, and that was it. They got the subsidy if the PEO observed wages in the tax register. So they didn't have to apply for the payments. Information might be important. So in the RCT, the treatment group was informed by letters, while in the regional experiment this was not done. It was kind of spread through the public administration offices that provide services to companies. So we find a significant positive effect, while in the regional experiment there is no significant impact, point estimate being negative. Our relative effect is 20%, while in the regional experiment it's close to zero. The treatment groups are quite similar sized, and actually the kind of the effective support rates are quite similar in the RCT and the regional subsidy. The regional subsidy is just kind of divided over 2 years. And then the kind of important difference is that the take-up rate is much higher in the RCT, and we think that this is because we had the prior information that the take-up rate is going to be low if we implement a similar subsidy as the regional subsidy, and kind of made the efforts to think about how to make this, how to increase the take-up rate. So the take-up rate in target population is at 1.5%, but then if you look at those who become employers, it's 32%, while in the regional experiment it was only around 2%, which is kind of tells us that something went wrong with the policy. The design was bad. Also, the average paid subsidies were very similar in magnitude, so kind of these are quite comparable in many aspects. Then we do some recommendations. So we recommend that when the policy is expected to have low take-up rates, then we recommend that in this kind of public policy settings the ITT to be estimated. Then also there is kind of one, I would say, a bit more unpredicted part and less controlled part of running this kind of experiment is the stage where the policymakers decide what to do. And at that stage, it's important to keep the researchers in the discussion. I think with the recruitment subsidy experiment, things went well, but I see that it could have went otherwise as well. So it's possible. So we wanted to kind of raise this point to kind of have this in mind for the policymakers as well in the future. And then one thing that we recommend is to procure evaluations as a single comprehensive contract. In our case, it came by bits, so it was pre-planned, then it was scientific support for implementation, and then it was the analysis. But typically, the kind of the scientific work is done in the pre-analysis, so it would be good and create correct incentives to kind of have the contract as a whole. And then we do some other recommendations. So just a couple of concluding remarks, if Antti allows me.
Okay, quickly. Yeah.
So the intended functioning of public policies is crucial for social and economic welfare, but governments often roll out very expensive programs without knowing what the true impacts are, although experimentation before full implementation provides significant potential opportunities. The resulting lack of evidence on what works and what does not likely reduces the effectiveness of public spending considerably. So Duflo talks about experiments as a practice of policy, meaning that by where one experiment reveals whether a treatment works, and researchers and practitioners can use that evidence to redesign the next treatment and then test the effectiveness of that treatment, and the cycle goes on. So it's rather a tool and practice than a single event. And the Finnish recruitment subsidy experiment is an example of such a practice, building on prior evaluations to test an improved type of policy design. And we hope that the example put forward by it will encourage similar large-scale experiments to be initiated for assessing the impacts and improving the effectiveness of a wide variety of public policies. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Elias. And next we'll have a comment by Sofie Cairo from Copenhagen Business School.
Hello, thank you for this opportunity to discuss a very interesting RCT in Finland. So basically, when I had a look at the paper, I saw that the main challenge was in how the experiment was designed, and what the researchers faced was this uncertainty regarding the take-up of this very costly treatment. So they had to balance oversubscription and undersubscription. And they settled on the stage-wise rollout. And that's very typical of experiments anyway, because most of the time when we implement experiments, we start by implementing a pilot phase in which we gather some kind of evidence. And then for the main experiment, we set ourselves up for the most possible success we can have, right? So I think a little bit of your first stage as a piloting of your design. But because you use the same design in both phases, you could then pool the data and run your analysis. And this first stage that you ran it turned out to be crucial, because it actually turned out that more than half of the population could have been invited to take up this policy. Now, the setting that we are operating within might be familiar to researchers who are used to the Nordics. And what this setting offers is really the possibility to do perfect randomization, because we have access to all the registers which allow us really to set up the perfect balanced treatment and control groups. Also, the researchers were able to rely on this existing infrastructure within the public institutions that they were collaborating with. And this is super important because from the regional subsidy experiment, or sorry, from the natural experiment, they had learned, okay, the take-up is really low. So they said, okay, within this infrastructure that we now have access to, how can we maximize the chance of people actually taking up this subsidy? And so they first of all, they were very strong on awareness, sending direct letters to these non-employer founders. And then they could use the infrastructure to really minimize compliance costs, so that the process was as automatic as possible in terms of signing up, being sure to be refunded with subsidies immediately. All these things that might have been the reason that the regional policy didn't work. Also, they were sure to design a flexible policy, making sure that the group of sort of marginal non-employers that would be interested in taking up this policy would be greater. Another thing from the Nordic context is, of course, the fact that we have great registers in terms of measuring the outcomes, right? So this is also something that we can benefit from when we set up these experiments in a Nordic setting. But in this case, you had great policy support and actually a law implementing the experiment in a sense. But typically in the Nordic setting and in other settings, it's a challenge, the fact that research has its own kind of slow process, and it takes time to run RCTs, to measure outcomes and so forth, while at the same time policy has these very short cycles where they want to see results very soon. And so this can be a challenge, especially when key people in these institutions that we're collaborating with are changing jobs while we're in the middle of running our RCTs. So working with the Ministry of Labor in Denmark, at least this is one challenge that we have faced, that you really need to have political support from above and from the bottom layer. But at both ends, key people that you're working with can really change many times during the process of running an RCT that might take a year to run, and then waiting for outcomes that materialize after 1 to 2 years. Okay. Regarding the actual policy, I mean, for us as researchers, it's not our decision to what policies are more efficient, but still I have to ask, this overall policy aim, make founders employers, why? What is the purpose? Is it for firms? Is it for workers? Was there any existing evidence of barriers for hiring in these startups? So the firms that actually took up this policy are typically these sole proprietorships. And there's not really an existing evidence that they generate a lot of growth that they take up, that they sort of like from employment start to generate growth, right? And also we don't really know much about what prevents them from hiring. Is it uncertainty of worker productivity, lack of regulatory knowledge, and so forth? I haven't seen myself evidence of positive effects on business scaling, firm growth, firm innovation from making this first hire. And as I read the paper, the authors don't find any significant effects on firm performance. So in a sense, the first stage, which is really, can we get firms to take up this policy? Yes, we can. It's successful, the first stage. Then the second stage would be, who are we helping? Are we helping these firms? Are we helping these workers? Well, that really depends on where the workers are coming from. Are they coming out of unemployment? Yes, then there's a potential that actually we're taking them out of unemployment, putting them into employment, right? And that would be a positive effect in my eyes. Or if it could help firms to grow or to become more innovative. But there's no such evidence at this point. So we know that job training programs generally do help workers to get into more permanent employment. But the question then is, of course, would it be better for these workers to be in larger corporations? Are they really best helped by being in sole founder companies where they are interacting with one person instead of creating maybe a big network? And I think one channel that is worth looking into is whether these people who actually who become this first employee, whether they're more likely to start their own startups. Because in that sense, it could actually have follow-up externalities on generating more startups. Okay. Another question, of course, is again to the policymakers rather than to the researchers, whether these hiring subsidies are the best, cheapest policy to achieve the policy goal of turning non-employers to employers. So several other alternatives than paying out very costly subsidies have been tried in the past and have been found to work. You could offer an infrastructure for posting jobs and screening candidates. That has been shown to be efficient. Or you could offer information on employment regulations. That's also been shown to generate similar effects. So when policymakers are starting to look into wanting to run an RCT, of course you need to start by lining up the catalog of which policies could be efficient in achieving the goal that you're hoping to achieve. Therefore, I hope that the researchers will also look into a sort of cost-benefit analysis and think about who are the workers. So, if they're coming out of unemployment, then of course it's a different piece of math relative to taking efficient employees from another firm, bringing them into these not very productive non-employer firms. Then there are the ethical considerations, which again is a comment more to the policymakers than the researchers. And that's about when we implement this kind of RCT, we have at the back of our minds that this is going to have a positive effect on the firms who are offered this subsidy. Otherwise, why would we start? Would we start to implement an RCT on a policy that we don't find is effective? No, we would not. So we implement it thinking that it's going to be effective, it's going to help these small firms. So is it ethical that we're only offering the treatment to 50% of the firms? I'm really happy that the Finnish authorities seem to have accepted what is the first best for researchers, which is exactly to randomize treatment. But in the Danish context, this is one of the things that I've had to discuss with the Ministry of Labour in implementing RCTs. That, okay, we can allow you to do a staggered implementation because we cannot hold back a policy that might be positive for some, from half of the population, right? So then you get to roll out only for 50% for a certain period, and then the rest have to be offered this policy. But that's one of the questions that you have to ask yourself in the startup, in the design phase, right? Which kind of ethical trade-off do we face with these policies? Okay, then, of course, in terms of hiring subsidies, are they really the most effective policy instrument to help these sole proprietorships? Would they have been better off with some kind of R&D subsidy? Would they maybe have been better off just being allowed to take these small firm loans that which allowed the sole proprietorships to choose themselves? Where are this money best spent? Is my main challenge is it really whether I can hire or not? Then, of course, as I mentioned before, there are these considerations of externalities, right? So that goes back to thinking about when I give some firms money to hire, where am I taking these employees from? Am I taking them out of jobs and companies where they're generating a lot of growth and now subsidizing them to go into these not very productive firms? And so when we design these experiments, what we can do is to, typically what one would do is to have a higher degree of treatment in some regions, and other regions you would just have a very small degree of treatment, and then you can measure if there are externalities on the sort of surrounding landscape of firms, whether they suffer. And this is, of course, important if we want to continue with the policy afterwards, that we are aware that it might create negative or positive spillovers. In terms of limitations or extensions, it's really helpful when we design these experiments that we actually take the time to run some kind of pre-survey before we set out, because that helps us. For instance, in this case, it would have helped the researchers to understand the perceived barriers or enablers for hiring amongst founders. So you get some kind of anchoring where first of all, you understand what is the main challenge in hiring that first employee. Are there any perceived barriers? But also the evidence that we collect sort of at the pre-stage can help us later on to do our subgroup analysis and look into specific mechanisms. In this case, also no post-survey was distributed, which could have been used to investigate whether the firms that had been treated had actually perceived to have benefits from the policy. And also, yeah, their employees, right, the people that were hired, were they perceiving that they were given a possibility to explore what it means to work for a startup and maybe with potential for future employment. And I think that for sort of further investigation into the topic, it's important to think about who were what companies actually took up this policy. So we know that the limited liability firms do actually see growth when they hire, but we haven't seen any evidence on this for the non-employer sole proprietorships. So if they're the ones that are more likely to take up the policy, then this is interesting. And then, of course, another aspect which I think you have access to in the registers would be to look at whether the relative timing to founding matters. It's super interesting whether it's a firm, I think, that has been going on for 20 years with one person that then suddenly starts to scale, or whether it's newly started firms that have these, this desire to get their first employee. In terms of industry, I know that you did, I think, clustered randomization or stratified randomization by industry codes. So I would encourage the researchers also to look into in which industries have these subsidies been where there a greater share of compliers. And when this hiring happens, are founders actually taking in people who can substitute themselves? Or are they getting in people with some kind of complementarities, lower skill, higher skill? Yeah, I think that's it. Okay, so I think there are a lot of things that can be learned from these types of experiments, and I'm not going to mention all of them, but there are definitely advantages for running these kind of RCTs in this Nordic setting. But there are, the different elements, the spillovers, the ethical considerations. These kind of things should be part of the recipe when we implement the RCTs. Good. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Sofie. I have just a couple of complementing comments, more from the practical side. First of all, I think that the register-based experimentation is a Nordic advantage, as we've already heard a couple of times here. All of the Nordic countries have good population registers, which enable cost-effective, high-powered evaluations. And especially seen in this paper, it's using sort of high-frequency data sets. The incomes register, it's available for researchers at the monthly level, but basically it's transaction-level data. You could probably get access to it at the daily level if that would be useful for some research question. And also from the tax authorities, the data is quite high frequency. But for other questions, you don't have this luxury. You may have only data at annual level or so, which limits the sort of questions that you can answer or how quickly you can answer some of these questions. But I still think that there's, at least in Finland, areas for improvement here. For example, access to data. As you can see from this paper, there was legislation on this, that the researchers have access to all of the data without any costs. And there may be problems with timeliness of the data. Here you're using tax authorities data, which is very up to date. But if you look at, for example, the firm registers at Statistics Finland, they are not very up to date. If you want to if you need to use that data to do your randomization and reach the firms, there's going to be some problems because those are not up to date. And the cost of accessing the data is high and getting higher all the time. And So this is one part which limits perhaps the research on these sort of experiments. One another point is that you mentioned it in the paper that you suggested that there would be some surveys to the firms to understand the low take-up puzzle. But this wasn't implemented, and I think this would have been very important and not that costly. If the experiment is 9 million plus the evaluation hundreds of thousands, doing this would have cost maybe 100,000 more, and this would have been probably quite beneficial for also other policies to understand what are the reasons why so few firms take this up. So with these surveys, you could answer the questions that did they receive or read the letters, and how complex they perceive the procedures to be, and what about the timing of these policies, and the liquidity effects, and how quickly you are reimbursed, and all that sort of stuff. And if you want to be a little bit more ambitious, you could randomize the content of the letters if you think that that's important, if you have some supporting information on that. So I think for policymakers thinking about these sort of issues, I think this is a valuable lesson that the marginal cost of doing these additional surveys wouldn't have been that high, but would potentially have been quite important. Okay, just the final point, the comparison to the quasi-experimental evaluation here. Just to sort of clarify for the audience, even though you very nicely pointed it out from the tables, that there was the difference between those evaluations is not only identification, but actually the policy was very different in terms of eligibility, faster and automatic payments in the RCT, and direct outreach. All great ideas to increase the take-up. But again, here, I think the survey would have been very useful to get better idea on how important these were. And so, yeah, I really think that it should have been done, would have been that costly. So that we would have gotten even more out of this experiment. Okay, thanks, but that was what I had in mind, and now we probably have time for maybe a couple of quick questions, if there are from the audience, before we go to the coffee break. Okay. Okay, quickly. Yeah.
A very quick question for the presenters. Did I count right that the impact size was 207 jobs, some part-time? If you multiply your impact estimates by the size of the group, I think I got 207. So
yes,
for 1 year.
So in the final evaluation, we calculate these and report these, and kind of our conclusion is that although kind of the experiment was successful in increasing the fraction of employers in the target group, it very unlikely had any significant kind of more aggregate impacts. And this is because of the low take-up rate. The number of new employers and new, even kind of the upper limit for new employees is very low. What we also see, and kind of in reflection to Sofie's excellent comments, we also look at kind of spillovers in the sense that whether not directly, but kind of try to get some indirect sense of where these employees that are hired come from, and we see that most of them were just before hiring to these treated companies, they were in employment. So they do not come from unemployment, they are not students or they are not spouses of these entrepreneurs. So the aggregate impacts we cannot expect to have. There's no much harm from this policy, but we cannot expect to see any kind of change in the aggregate employment from this policy. Of course, the treatment period was low, and it's important to keep in mind that this is an increase in the flow rate. So over time, this might have some, and the impacts might accumulate. But to make a very strong conclusion, we can speculate and do back of the envelope calculations on what would be the implications if the rate is consistently high. But maybe we would need a longer experiment to really say very strongly about how much the kind of long-term flow rate into employership increased.
Okay, so we have time for one quick question from there. Okay, so Janika.
We only have one.
Okay. Okay, we need to have it for the online audience.
Okay.
Okay.
The next question.
Oh,
We don't want to.
Eli, English. Is this program going on for 4 or 8 years, or was just research limited for certain time? Et toivottavasti se jatkuu, kun persut ei ole enää hallituksessa, mutta viimeistä lausetta ei käännetä.
Yeah. So this was a temporary experiment, right? So it's ended already. Yeah. Yeah.
So it was a temporary experiment, and the policy was not rolled out in full scale or implemented in full scale. So it's not in place at the moment.
Yeah. Okay, and one more quick, and then we'll go to the coffee break. So we have 2 minutes time, so we'll get that and
Thank you. So policy can be good or bad, and experiments can be good or bad. And in this case, low pickup rate and low effects was explained by bad or not perfect design. But it was not clear to me whether it was the design of the policy or whether it was the design of choices because of the experiment that was not good enough.
So I do not completely agree that the kind of policy or the design was somehow flawed in the sense that we see quite large relative effects. The reason why the policies cannot be thought of as having large effect at the level of the whole economy is because of this population of non-employer firms is just some fraction of all firms. And in this population, the incidence of becoming an employer has quite low likelihood. So the fraction who become employers is quite low. So that's why the kind of the nominal effects are quite low, but the relative effects are quite large. But there are just not many non-employer entrepreneurs that would become employers even with this kind of subsidy.
Okay, thanks a lot. That's for the first paper, and now we have a 10-minute coffee break, and we'll continue 10 sharp with the next topic. Okay, thanks.